And now let's go back over here to Keynote and let me start this presentation. So the first part of this is going to be a presentation. And I need to share my screen. Let's do that. Share screen. I want to share desktop one. Okay.
Oh,
Okay. So now can you see my sharing screen now?
turn it off.
Do you want something?
Too much trouble.
All right. Can you?
Okay.
Let's see who's talking over here. All right. Okay. So you guys can see my screen. Somebody?
Right.
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So now I go here. And we go here. We go here. We go take this. We'll get this figured out. It was a little bit easier when there's two of us and I was doing the technical stuff. Put this down here, pull this on there. Let's do one more thing here. I'm going to pull these guys down to this monitor, and now we'll go back to here. And I think that's it. All right. So welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Oitzman. And I've seen several of you around for meetings, but if we haven't met before, my name's Mike. I been photographer for my whole life, back in the film days in college, and then digital when my kids were born. I bought my first digital camera and started taking pictures of the kids. And then landscape became a passion, and then ultimately night photography. I'm an engineer by degree, so I like things technical, and night photography is a deeply technical genre of photography. So if you like technical things, it's a great skill to learn and acquire. So what I want to do with you today is talk to you about, what are some of those basic skills to get a good data when you're in the field, right? So today you're going to learn how to plan a night photography session. Okay, we'll talk about that for the first bit of the meeting, so that you know what it takes to actually go out on a night where you're going to be able to get decent photography. I do a lot of Milky Way photography, but that doesn't mean that this doesn't apply to nightscapes. If you want to go take a pictures of a city or bridges at night or anything at night, really, right? So we'll talk about planning first, then we'll talk about what it takes to photograph in the field, so get a good image in the field. And then we'll talk about processing briefly in Lightroom with the last part of this session. Okay, so that's what you're going to learn today in the next hour and a half or so. For the folks in the room, I'm just going to grab get my handouts here. I will have a handout for you in a few minutes when we get to the photographing part. In fact, I think I've got enough here. I can hand these out. So I'll pass these around. And for folks that are online, you will get a link in a few minutes where you can actually download this file from my website. And if I go back one bit here, I have started sort of a new business called Master the Milky Way. And my plan is to start running some night field trips in the next year. Outside of the club, we'll probably do one with the club, but outside of the club, to various places around Northern California to capture the Milky Way in the evening sky. Okay, so that's what Master of the Milky Way is about. The website's down here, masterthemilkyway.com. All right, so let's get with it. So here's some of the challenges of night photography. First of all is the preparation. So what does it take to get ready to go out and take a picture? What does it take to get the correct exposure? And here we're going to talk about manual part of your camera. You do need to put your camera in manual. If you've never done that, that's an important part of this, because you've got to be fully manual to get a good exposure at night. It's also about knowing your gear. So it's one thing, and if some of you may have just gone to the beginning class, it's one thing to know how your menu system works and where your menus are. It's another thing to know where all these buttons are in the back of your camera so you can find them in the dark, right? And especially, it's an important skill, because the last thing you want to do is keep turning on your light on and off and ruining your night vision to try and get to the thing. So being able to know, what buttons you've assigned and where those are and how they feel. So, part of the practice can be can you, in a dark room, find the various things, sit in your bedroom at night with no lights on and find all the various things and memorize where they are. So that's another important skill is knowing your gear and knowing how to find all those different parts of your camera, right? And then one of the other things I want to talk about is safety. So let's talk about safety at night. And there's a couple things I want you to consider about this. So first of all, if you're going out at night to unfamiliar terrain, if you're going to hike, go out on some beautiful landscape point that you want to capture the Milky Way over a lake or something like that, you should go hike that trail in the daylight before it's dark, right? So I highly encourage that. And that's important because there's things you're going to run into at night that you may not be able to see, maybe unfamiliar terrain. Your 3D vision isn't as great at night either. So some of the things I've run into, spider webs, right? Those are things that you don't want to find. Barbed wire, cow patties, holes, rocks, and including streams and of course cliffs you might not see. So we like to take pictures on cliffs, knowing where the cliff edge is, knowing what's really dangerous and what you want to stay away from. So I want to start with that point that you need to be safe, right?
Sounds like you could pre-market and put little orange flags where you want to stand.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great, going out and actually getting the exposure set. Now, it's one thing to say you want to go out and hike it a couple of days before. It's one thing if you're out if you're traveling, you're camping, go hike it. As you said, as Sydney just asked, you could, set some rocks to where you want your tripod to go, actually set up your tripod. It's another thing, if no one's going to be out there, just set up your tripod, leave your tripod, take your camera back to the campsite type of thing. So now you've got your tripod all set in the place you want to take, and maybe you don't want to leave your camera sitting around, for example, if you're out backpacking type of thing, right? So always I encourage you to pre-scout the location. The other thing to think about, and I think about this all the time, is that you are a target if you've got thousands of dollars of gear on you for somebody to jump you and take your gear, right? So that's the other thing to be aware of if you're going out by yourself, right? So I'm a big guy, 6'5", I'm maybe a little bit intimidating, but the point is you don't want to put yourself at risk. Now, there was a question, Jim. What was your question?
Yeah, couldn't you use a very low level red light?
We're going to get to that. Yeah. So we'll talk about lighting is important. You don't
mean to find your way around and so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Jim asked a question about night lights. And so I've got an example here of a headlamp that, has a red light by default. This red light will help your eyes adjust and you don't lose your night vision with a red light. So I encourage you, if you're going to do any sort of night photography, to buy a headlamp that has this red light. And you notice it's by default, it comes on red first for me. It doesn't go to white. I actually have to hold it down for it to go white, right? So, but buying a headlamp that has that red lamp is important. And then the other thing to be aware of course, is that can be animals out in the dark, and I've been chased by dogs at night. I've been out with cattle in cattle enclosures. There's a lot of great places to go take photography down, like Smartsville, for example. There's cattle out there you have to be aware of. But of course, snakes, skunks, bears, mountain lions, all of those things are dangerous to you when you're out there at night. Certainly, I do a lot of it by myself. I'm not afraid of the dark. Again, I'm a big guy, but also going with other people is important as well, so that you got multiple ears and eyes. Nothing freaks you out more than hearing something rustling around you, right? So the other thing that I don't do is I don't wear, you might be saying, I'm going to put my headphones in and listen to a podcast or whatever. I don't do that at night. I always want my hearing. I want to know what's going on around me. And the last thing here is that I always carry bear spray with me, right? So buying a can of bear spray that works for any animal that's going to attack you other than a snake, which you shouldn't be stepping on, right? You should hopefully see a snake, but it's also can be a deterrent if someone wants to hassle you about taking your equipment. Having bear spray might deter them as well. So that's another thing that I encourage you to think about. Yeah.
Bear spray. So you get close enough to a bear to spray them, or you're spraying yourself?
Okay, so good question. So Rachel has a question about bear spray. Without going down the rabbit hole of how to use bear spray, there's YouTube videos that show you how to use it. Bear spray is meant to deter a bear who's 20 yards away from you or so, right? It sprays a nice little stream pepper spray, super concentrated pepper spray, right? You don't want to use it on yourself because it'll, as much as pepper spray might hurt you, bear spray will incapacitate you probably for an hour, right? So as it does for the bears, you do, and when you spray it, then you want to grab your stuff and go, right?
It was used in the assault on the Capitol.
Yeah.
For any reasons.
Yeah. So, you know, and I might say you want to use bear spray to assault somebody, you know, but if someone's assaulting you, it'll give you some time and distance to get away. Right. So, anyhow, so that's about safety. Okay. So safety is important. Always try to go out with the group. If any of you ever want to go out at night and are looking for a partner, give me a call. I'm always up for going out. I will volunteer in a moment's notice to go out with you anytime, anywhere for a night photography session. Yeah.
Is there a reasonably close location that you can get away from a majority of the light pollution?
Lucchesi.
Okay, we're going to talk about light pollution. So Desert, is it?
Yeah.
Desert asked a question about light pollution. Hold that thought. We'll come back to that in just a moment. All right. All right. So let's talk about planning the shot. So this will come into your question. So planning the shot, you want to think about two things when you're planning your shot, right? First of all is the sky. If you want to get the Milky Way in, you've got to think about, you know, the time of day, night, and the actually day of the month to get the Milky Way at a good spot. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you want to think about your foreground, because if you look at my shot on the left here, without a foreground, yeah, you can get a good image of the Milky Way, but it's sort of boring to not have any foreground, right? So you do want to think about what's in your foreground. You want to think about lighting that foreground or getting an exposure for the foreground that's going to give you an interesting image where the Milky Way is a good part of that. And also you've got something in the foreground, whether here it's the tufas at Mono Lake, or it's an old barn, or it's an old tractor, it's our car, it's a tree, it's a branch, something interesting. And that's why pre-scouting during the day will allow you to find these locations, because going out to a place you've never been and trying to find something interesting in the foreground is really hard with your flashlight, because you're like, oh, is that flower look interesting? Or, you know, because you got much greater vision, you can say, oh, there's something over there 50 yards away outside of your flashlight range that's a better foreground. That's why pre-scouting is important. Okay. In addition to the danger part, also finding yourself a good foreground. Okay. We're going to hold that thought. We're going to talk more about foregrounds in a minute. Now, the other thing that's important about technical aspects of night photography is that the simplest type of night photography is a single exposure here on the left side, where you just take a single exposure and you try to expose for the foreground and the background and try to get everything in one shot. And it may be that's where you start. Everybody should start there. That's what we're going to talk about for today. But there's a range here, a spectrum of ways to get actually better quality out of your imagery. The second step up in difficulty and quality is to do a composite image, where you maybe do an exposure for the sky and an exposure for the foreground, and then you combine them later in Photoshop or Lightroom, right? So that's the second step in terms of quality and difficulty. The next step is a stacked image, and we're not going to talk about stacked images today other than to say that they exist. I'll do more advanced classes later on in the year about stacked imagery, but here in a stacked image, what you do is you take multiple images of your scene or the sky. For example, the Milky Way. You might take like 20 images, and then you put them into a piece of software that stacks them, and it removes all the noise because it stacks them. But when you stack images on top of each other in these software packages, they get rid of the noise, they accumulate all the starlight, and they accumulate all the beautiful detail of the Milky Way. So you get a really super detailed, rich image. So stacking is where it really starts to get interesting from a high quality sky image, right? And then the best quality image comes from what's called a tracked image. And a track image uses this device that I have over my shoulder here. This is a sky tracker. And it's this device that actually sits right here, this box right here that's in black. And you can see I've got a tripod on top of this device. And basically what this does is this accounts for the rotation of the Earth, because the Milky Way is always moving and all the stars are always moving. We're going to talk about exposure in a minute here. This allows you to take super long exposures, like 2 minutes, without having any blurry stars in your image, right? So this is the top quality. And there are a half dozen types of manufacturers that make different star trackers. Okay, and we'll come back and talk briefly about that. We can talk about that after the class if you want to learn more about that. I'm not going to talk about how to do a tracked image, just to tell you that they exist. And there's more equipment. Yay, more equipment. But that's one of the other things that exists as well. Okay. All right. And then, of course, the best quality can come when you take tracked image, you take multiple stacked images and you put them together. And if you ever like looked at the great astrophotography images of nebula and what have you, that's how they get that. They take a telescope and they'll take multiple, 10-minute images, and then they'll do that over the course of a night. It's tracking that nebula with the telescope as it goes through the sky, and you stack it. You can end up with 1 hour long exposures. And that's how you get all those really high quality deep sky images. And that's the pinnacle of night sky imaging. And there's a lot of techniques to all of that, right? So that sort of gives you the spectrum of what's possible from the night sky. Okay. All right. So let's talk about imaging the Milky Way. When we take a picture of the Milky Way, a single image of the Milky Way, what we want to try and do is we want to try to have sharp stars. So we don't want to have any star smears. So if you expose for too long, those stars are going to actually move while the shutter's open, and you're going to get smears, right? I'm going to talk to you about in the next slide how to calculate how long of an exposure you're going to need. Okay, so we want to do that. We want to have nice contrast in our scene. And we want to try and reduce the noise as much as possible. But as we're going to learn, ISO is the only variable that you have to play with once you get everything set up to try and accumulate enough light to get a decent scene. Okay, so hold that thought for just a minute. All right. So, and of course, if you look at the Milky Way, you'll hear me talk about the Milky Way core. And the Milky Way core is this part that I've outlined in the image here. It's actually sort of the center of the actual Milky Way galaxy that we're a part of, right? And it's the part with the most detail, most interesting sort of things that you want to try and include. And there's something called the Milky Way season, in which the Milky Way where we live is actually above the horizon. And it's above the horizon from about March until about October. Now, from November, December, January, and February, it's actually never rises above the horizon for 4 months. Okay, just because of the way we're tilted towards winter, right? So there's a season in which it's comes above the horizon. And there's 4 months of the year where it's not above the horizon, but there's still a beautiful part of the Milky Way. You can do Milky Way, January 1st. You just won't get the core where we live. Okay. The other thing that's important is the moon. The moon can either be your friend or your enemy, right? And here's two exact images from the exact same part. And this is I did a time lapse when we were out at the winery a couple of years ago. We did a night workshop, right? And I was taking images over 2 hours. And the one on the left here was before the moon came up, right? So you can see that immediately, even see these are just sort of raw images that you can sort of see the Milky Way there. As soon as the moon rises, it washes out the Milky Way, and you can still sort of see it, but it's not going to give you a great image once the moon comes up, especially if it's a full moon. A full moon night, forget it. You're not going to be able to see much of the night sky. If there's any cloudiness, anything in the sky from a clouds, it's also going to occlude that, right? So it's important that, and we'll talk about, how we can actually determine where the moon's going to be at any time of the month, right? Okay, so the moon. The other thing, though, is you might want to take an image, if you're talking about a composite image, where you take an image of the night sky before the moon rises, and then leave your camera on the tripod for an hour and come back. And then once the moon comes up, use the moonlight to illuminate your foreground. Right. So that's another actual technique. Or if the moon's going to set, you can take your picture where you image for the foreground, and then after the moon sets, then image your night sky without taking your camera off the tripod. So net of it is you're going to spend a lot of time out in the dark, right? Taking images. And if you want to do something like that, you might be sitting there for a couple hours. You might want to bring a chair, and that's where you might, a cup of coffee and sit and relax for a bit, or go back to the car, right? Those type of things, wherever you're doing this. So, All right. So here's my recommended gear list. This is sort of the minimum things that you need to have to be a night photographer. Of course, you need a nice solid tripod, right? A good tripod. You need a camera that has manual mode on it. So any camera that has manual mode will work, right? You need a wide angle lens, and I've got a couple of examples on the table here that I've run through. So, this was the first one that I bought. This is a 10 millimeter Rokinon lens. The good news about this lens is that it's a manual lens. You don't need autofocus for night photography. In fact, you're going to put your lens into manual focus pretty much, right? So this Rokinon lens, for any camera body, they make it for Sony, they make it for Nikon, they make it for Canon, they make it for, with the right mount on the bottom of it. These Rokinon lenses are about $300, and it's super high quality. This is a great brand, off-brand to buy if you want to buy a manual lens, right? This one happens to have a Canon mount because that was for my Canon camera, right? You can also buy some great lenses. This is for my Sony A6000. This was my second upgrade. This is the Sigma 16 millimeter f1.4 lens. This is an absolutely beautiful lens for night photography. This does have autofocus on it, right? I don't use it when I'm taking night photography, but this is a great night. So basically you want to get as wide of a lens as you can afford, right? With as small of an aperture as possible, right? So this is a f1.4. A kit lens will work too for your first images, right? So you can do that even if it's f5.6. You're just not going to be able to get as much light into it, right?
So what lens f-stop do you recommend? You said 1.8
The widest as possible. So you want the widest that lenses goes. That's why I said you investing in a specific night lens that's in the f1.4, f1.8, f2.4 type of range is a good investment if you're going to get into this night photography thing. Yeah.
So is this a FE mount then?
Yes.
It'll for the full frame.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. That lens, that Sigma lens is not a full frame. Sorry. But here's my new. So now I've just upgraded so I'm a Sony shooter. So now this is the Sony 7 Mark IV. And I just invested in this Samyang. I'll make sure I get this right, because this is the Samyang f1.8 lens. The beautiful thing about this lens is it's got a trick little feature on it. And we're going to talk about focusing next. When I hold down this button and I turn on my camera and hold it down for a second until this goes green. So now you can see there's a green light on here. This just set it to infinity focus. So now the stars are perfectly in focus. I don't have to touch anything on this lens, right? So this has this Samyang f1.8 has that special feature, and there's the astrophotography feature that it automatically sets it to infinity. So if you have a Sony full frame and want to invest in a lens, I highly recommend this. So
do you know if Samyang sells Canon mount too?
I don't know if they have it in Canon mount, but I think they made it first it's about a year-old lens.
Infinity focus is a trick.
It is a trick.
On every other lens on the planet.
And we're going to talk about that. But this is a great little feature on this lens, and which is why I bought it. And this is what I've been shooting with the last year. I love this lens.
And what is the millimeter?
I'm sorry, this is a 24 full frame. This is a full frame lens. So if you have a full frame Sony, I highly recommend that.
What was the cost?
I think it was like 400. Yeah. And that's autofocus. So it's an autofocus fixed 24 millimeter 1.8. So yeah, it's a great little lens. And then you can see some of the other things in here. We already talked about the red LED headlamp, which I sent around. And then the other thing now, you can use when you take an image, and we'll talk about this in the shooting part. You can, for example, set your delay to like 2 seconds, so you don't, or 10 seconds, so you don't get any wiggle. But I hate waiting 10 seconds for things to happen, right? And I'll tell you what, I was out shooting the full moon one year, and what did I see happen? I saw a jet flying into the moon, right? While I'm shooting the full moon, I'm by the 10 seconds, so it was out of the moon, right? So I'm like, So now, of course, you've got your choice of remotes like this. So here's a wired remote. I would also recommend you getting either a wired remote / intervalvometer, or now I most recently bought my wireless one, which I love because it lets me now jump into this scene as the foreground, which is another thing to take a picture of. If you got nothing else, you can take a picture of yourself, either in silhouette or what have you. So getting a wireless mount is great. And then the other thing about these, what's called an intervalvometer, is that you can put it in bulb mode. You can set this for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, however long you want. Of course, your camera probably only goes to 30 seconds in its standard, setting before it goes to bulb, right? So if you want to do more than 30 seconds, then you need this, especially if you're doing tracked images, right? So the other thing about tracked images that I don't like this cable on is that even this cable will pull on the tracked images. Any little wiggle on this will even mess up that long exposure. So having the wireless on the tracker is the ultimate for getting high quality, right?
Do you, if you have the choice, do you always shoot electronic shutter versus conventional shutter?
I try to, I think I'm doing conventional shutter. I haven't really used electronic shutter. Yeah. Good question. I don't think,
Bulb mode.
I don't think you can. Yeah. All right. So, and then the last thing I was going to talk about was this device. So, and it's, you can see this down here, this Protege. So this is a lens heater. So this little device is called a lens heater. If you want to go shoot in the wintertime now, starting in January, December, February, when it's going to be 30 degrees, 40 degrees outside, your lenses can actually start to get dew on it if you're out there for any length of time. A lens heater, what you do with this is you wrap it around your lens. So I'll take off the lens hood here. You wrap this, and this is just a heating element. It goes around your lens like this. You can see I wrapped it around, and then it's got this wire, and then I just plug this into an USB power block, and it warms up the lens, and it keeps your lens warm so it won't collect dew on it. So shooting in the winter months, you need to have a lens heater. This is like $20 on eBay. So I mean, not eBay, on Amazon. So any of these lens heaters work.
So where are you getting your power from?
It's a power block. You just need one of those, like you would
A battery.
Or a
kind of thing?
laptop.
Like one of the.
a battery pack. Yeah, battery pack, external battery pack for recharging your cell phone or what have you, right? Okay, so that's another great if you're going to go out in the cold months of the year, right? All right. On to the next one. Okay, so let's talk about planning your first shot. I got to pay attention to my time here. So we stand up. Okay, so here's the things that you need to consider when planning your shot. First, about the weather. So if there's going to be any clouds in the sky, don't bother going out to get the night sky, of course. So you need some weather app, right? You need to know when the moon phase is and moon rise. We'll talk about that on the next slide. We're going to talk about light pollution. I got a great website for you to use to understand light pollution. When the Milky Way core is going to rise, what your foreground or focal point is going to be, and then what's the phase of the Milky Way. Okay, so with that in mind, here's some apps that can help you plan this. Photo pills, you maybe have heard of many of us talk about. I'm not going to demo photo pills, but I'm going to have a screenshot of it here in a minute. Photo pills is a great app. It's $10. I think it's a great investment if you're going to do any night sky because of all of the features that it has on it, right? So that's a great app. It's both Android and iOS. But the Stellarium app can do some of what Photo pills does. We're going to demo that in just a second. Clear Outside is another great weather app that is free. It's on iOS. I think it's on Android as well. And what it's awesome about it is why isn't that coming in here? Maybe I should have a signal on it. Clear Outside is an astrophotography app, and it lets you know if there's going to be high clouds, low clouds, fog, that type of stuff in your area that you're shooting. So that's a great app. And then there's a couple of other apps if you don't want photo pills, Ephemeris or Planet Live, that are also alternatives to photo pills. You don't need all three of those. So, all right. So let's talk about the phases of the moon. And this changes every month. This happens to be from May 2021, and this is a screenshot from PhotoPills. So PhotoPills has this as one of the things you can look at in it. And it shows you where the moon is dark, that means it's a no moon. And where the moon is full, that's a full moon, right? And it shows you how the moon is going to change throughout the month. And if the week where there's a full moon, pretty much it's not worth shooting for the 3 days before and after that full moon, right? So don't even bother planning that. And if you're planning a vacation and you want to go out to the beach and you want to take pictures of the moon, you might look at that and say, well, honey, let's go the next week because the moon's going to be in place. So that's you use that to plan your trips and your vacation, right? Now, here's a screenshot from PhotoPills, and here's the kind of information that it shows you. You pick the night that you want to go out, and you can pick any night in the future here to see what the moon's going to look like. It tells you the moon phase there. And then it tells you when the moon's going to rise, when the sunset's going to happen. It tells you when the moon's going to set. It tells you when the Milky Way core is going to rise. So if this is a Friday night, Saturday morning, for example, we can see that the moon sets at 4:22 in the afternoon. Great. So the moon's gone, right? It tells us that the Milky Way is going to rise at 10:30 in the evening, right? So that's when it will first appear in the horizon. And then we can see that it sets then again at 4:13. So we've got 5 hours of shooting time, although it's after midnight, right? So that's the other part. You're going to be up in the middle of the night, but you've got 5 hours to try and take a shot, right? And during that time, the Milky Way is going to change a little bit in its arc, right? And PhotoPills has an AR feature down here at the bottom of it that lets you point it. And I'm sorry for the folks online. I'm just going to show the folks briefly here in the room. If I go to PhotoPills, I go to the moon, I go to AR, and I go to sensors, you can see the Milky Way. Where's up? I'm sorry. Let's go. I was in the wrong place. Done. Let's go to done. Let's go to back. Let's go to AR down here. This is what I wanted to show you. So you can see where the Milky Way is. It's actually over there right now, and it's telling me in real time with this AR here that little dark strip is the Milky Way in its current situation, and you can actually advance time and see where the Milky Way is going to be as it rises. And this is a beautiful little app because you can take this with you during the day. When you're scouting, you can put this in the sky and you can fast forward till 2 o'clock in the morning and see exactly where the Milky Way is going to be, right? And then that can help you figure out where you want to put your camera. So you've got the Milky Way lined up with whatever foreground object it is. Okay, that's
still PhotoPills.
This is still PhotoPill. Yeah.
Does that work offline or can you save that?
You can create a plan. You can actually look at it from, I'm not going to talk about how to use this, but I will tell you that you can, like a Google Maps view, you can put a pin down and it'll tell you that, orientation of the Milky Way to where that you put that pin down on the map. So let's say you're going to Hawaii, you wanted to see what's the Milky Way going to be on Maui, on the beach. You could put a pin on the Maui beach and you could say, oh, I can see it's going to be to this orientation, right? And so you can have some idea of whether it's going to be in the scene or not with what you want to look at. Okay, there are some awesome videos about how to use PhotoPill on YouTube. So I would point you there for.
The other one you mentioned was Planet, I think.
Yep.
And I was reading some reviews because I was going to buy something.
Yep.
I use that sky view just to figure out where things are in the date and time. It kind of, I'm kind of like ready to advance to that level. And some people said that was better than PhotoPills, but PhotoPills they seem to just have a world of support.
Yeah, I don't use Planet. I've played with it a little bit. I'm a huge PhotoPills person, and as you said, they've got so many great how-to videos, how to do anything on it. It's a little bit, there are some things that are hidden and not in the easiest place to find.
Right.
Some things like searching for a site, the map is sort of hidden. But once you figure it out, it makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so let's go. Oh, no, I said so. Here we say so. This is the kind of information we get. 5 hours of shooting time, and we can see that the moon's going to rise a half an hour after the core. So if you wanted to use the moon to light something, you could see that you'd want to go in the early morning rather than right after midnight if you needed the moon to illuminate. And PhotoPills will give you that sort of data, right? Okay. The other tool to use is Stellarium Web, right? And so let me exit from this. So Stellarium Web is a great tool. Let me come over here. Let me go to Stellarium. I assume you guys can still see my screen online, right? Okay, so I allow it to know where I'm at. Oh, it's just, I agree. Okay, so the beautiful thing here is that you can take this and you can move around at a spot, and you can actually see what's going to happen in the night sky. You can turn on the azimuth grid so you can sort of see what's going on. It tells you that there's the moon and Jupiter and Uranus, and that's facing east, right? So this is a great little thing. You can is it down? You can forward in time, right? So I can go forward in time. I can go forward in the months, right? So if I want to go out to March 5th of 2023, right? So you can go forward in time there and sort of see what the night sky is going to look like here. And this is free. So, you know, if you don't not quite ready to invest in photo pills for sort of figuring out what the Milky Way is going to look like, you can use this. I forgot here. You can turn on deep sky objects.
Does it give you Milky Way core?
Yes. I'm trying. Where's the Milky Way? Why is it? The Milky Way should be on here. I'm not trying to figure out why it's.
This out?
What's the date that you have?
It's in March. There we go. There we go. Yeah, that's exactly, yes, there. Thanks. And so, yeah, you can watch the Milky Way move during the night, right? So you can see how it's going to come up. You can find your orientation right there, right? And sort of see when it's going to be. And you can, this sort of is a good way to sort of see how the Milky Way progresses throughout the year, right? So the Milky Way starts, it starts in sort of the eastern sky in the early part of the year, right? And then it progresses more to the south and finally to the southwest in the latter part of the year. And there's a part of the season that we call the Milky Way arch, which is the only time of the year you can actually get an arch, is in the early part of the season here, where it's low from March, April, May, and then after that it's mostly vertical, and then it's in the intra orientation, and then it leans to more to the right, to the southwest. So
Have you ever used that with your iPhone? I'm just wondering if you could actually see where the Milky Way is. You're looking at a high resolution screen,
yeah,
and on a little iPhone, I don't know how you'd see that. The Milky Way.
yeah, I'm not. I have not used it. I use photo pills when I'm
Yeah.
on my phone rather than And I'm trying to remember where's the location. There's a way to set your location.
Yeah, you can. Like I'm pressing, can you put another latitude, longitude?
Yeah.
screens?
Yeah, I think it's here. There we go. Yeah. So I set it to Grass Valley, but I could, I could say, New York City. Although why would you want to do New York City? But right. So take New York City, set the pin there. Yeah. But and you don't actually see a real scene here. It just sort of sets the point there and shows you what the sky will look like at that point in the world. Okay. So I don't want to spend too much time. I just wanted to show you, give you a taste of that, let you know that exists. Okay. So let's go back to the here. Let's go back to this. I'm going to pay attention to my time here. Okay. The other thing we talked about was light pollution. Right. And so here's a couple of examples how light pollution impacts your scene. So here's a scene that I took at Kings Beach in Tahoe, and there was light pollution from both Tahoe City as well as South Shore, and they show up as these bright blobs. Right. This is one of my favorite places to take pictures is Packer Saddle up in the Buttes. Right. But you still get light pollution from Grass Valley. Right. So the question becomes, how can you be aware of that? Well, there's a website called lightpollutionmap.info. Okay. And what this is showing us here, I'm actually not going to go to this. I'm just going to use the screenshot to show you that where you see the blue, the purple is the dark sky. So if you were at the point where there was a blue or purple area and you looked up, you would see super dark skies, right? Whereas as we get to the cities, we got Grass Valley, Nevada City right here with the pin, right? You can see the big ring. It's obviously at night here, you can't see great skies because of the light pollution above us, right? But if this is 80, just to our west here, we have one of the best dark sky spots just off over here off of Nyack Airport, off of Nyack exit on 80. In fact, there's 3 planetary observatories there. So you can go out there on any weekend night when there's no moon. Blue Canyon Airport. Yeah.
Where does it go?
Blue Canyon Airport. And it's beautiful dark skies. And the beauty thing is that the Milky Way is, again, you just learned, is to our east, south, and southwest, right? And that's looking off into the dark blue where there's nothing, no cities to light polluted, right? You can always shoot from an area that's bright into an area that's dark and get good skies, assuming you've got that eastern view. But as you can see, you go down here to Yuba City, forget it, right? Down in Yuba City, it's just total light pollution down,
Is that
especially.
small yellow blob to the south, is that Colfax
This is,
from Grass Valley?
no, this is Penn Valley
South.
here. Yeah, this is Lake of the Pines right here. Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah,
otherwise-
you got Colfax on,
right here, right here. This is
Yeah.
Colfax right here, yeah. So,
I'm in Chicago Park. that's right.
yeah, so light pollution dot map, this gives you the world and it'll help you find, again, if you're planning vacations, you're planning your camping trips, great to see what the night sky is going to look like. So it's a great resource. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk about photographing. Rachel, when is this?
You've got 30 minutes.
30 minutes. Perfect. Yeah. Okay. Great.
Well, this-
All right. So now let's talk about photographing. So that's the basics there about knowing when to go, knowing where to go, right? And so that you're going to have a chance of actually getting a good image, because I hate for you to go out, and then realize, oh my gosh, it's cloudy, or oh my gosh, there's too much light pollution, right? Oh my gosh, I didn't realize the moon was going to be up. Those are the questions you have to ask yourself before you even bother leaving the house, right? But now let's assume you've got a good location, you've planned it out, you've scouted it out, and now it's going out to the field to get the data. So let's talk about what it takes to photograph get good data. All right, so I handed out the sheet, and for those of you that are online, if you want to download this sheet, go to masterthemilkyway.com/cheat sheet, or just masterthemilkyway.com, and you'll see a link to the cheat sheet there. I have both a large 8.5 by 11 sheet, or you actually have a cell phone version as well, which you can download at any point to your phone, right? So we're going to talk about what it takes to get the basic image. So you're going to have to put your camera in manual, including manual focus. I highly encourage you to shoot in RAW, right? If you've never shot in RAW, now's the time to start shooting in RAW. And the reason is because you want to be able to adjust your color settings in that RAW image in post-processing, so you can change the color and make it look right. Okay, JPEG at night is probably going to give you some screwy results, right? You'll be disappointed in your ability to edit afterwards. Okay. Another important feature is to turn off your in-camera noise reduction. So again, I can help you find this on your camera after class if you're curious, but every of the most recent cameras have what's called noise reduction. You might be tempted to turn that on because it will actually reduce the noise of the image that's saved on your camera. But the penalty you pay is it takes twice as long as your exposure. So if you do a 30-second exposure, you have to wait, not touching your camera, for another 30 seconds for it to process that again before it saves it. So you double your exposure time. I hate waiting in the field. It's dark, cold as it is. I want to get in and out of the field as quickly as possible. So turn it off. I think the post-processing light noise reduction is way better anyways now. Okay.
Yeah. This camera doesn't allow you to switch it off.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's very, very upsetting. I love this camera.
What is that? That's a
That's a Leica.
Leica. Okay, so they're
Yeah. So I shoot the night sky stuff with my phone.
Okay. Yeah. Now I do say, I mean, you want to use a white balance of daylight that's your choice, but you can just do auto white balance. If you're shooting RAW, it doesn't matter anyway. Why would I say daylight? Well, you're using typically starlight, which is the same thing as our star, or you're using the moonlight, which is bouncing off of the moon. So it's still wanted in that range, but otherwise I just use auto white balance and leave it at that because I'm shooting raw, right? We talked about shutter delay of 2 seconds or using a remote trigger so that you don't have any jiggle on your camera. You can't handheld your camera unless you have a Sony 7C. You can't take a handheld image, right? But you want it on your tripod?
Quick question. So you were talking about the jet flying across the moon, you had it on 10 seconds.
Mhm.
If you had your, for whatever reason you were doing that and you had your wireless remote, could you click it and override that?
No,
No.
that's
So
all it's going to
that-
do is
it would
initiate
replace that.
the trigger.
Okay.
Hey, I'll give you one more side because we went out and did the field trip to take pictures of we talked, this is night photography as well. We went out and did the carnival rides, right? So the other thing that I hate about the delayed trigger for carnival rides, if you do it, it's 10 seconds, the whole ride changes. When you've got a remote trigger and bulb setting, the way that I capture the carnival rides is, I'm watching the patterns of lights. And so to try and get a nice, even, what's the word I'm looking for? That arc, you can hit it when it starts and then it gets a half arc and then stop, or a whole arc or whatever. You actually have control of the ride when the ride's happening, or if you're doing car lights, you're trying to use, long exposure of cars on roads and what have you. Having the remote trigger and bulb lets you control when it starts exactly coming into your scene and when it leaves the scene, type of thing. So if you want any control, that's where I think that's an invaluable investment for your night photography, is having that trigger and using bulb rather than the 2-second delay. Yeah. Okay. And then the other thing, I learned this the hard way, you probably want to turn up the monitor brightness on the back of your screen to see the image because it's dark. But if you leave that on, it burns through your battery quick, especially when it's cold. So another little sidebar is to set that monitor brightness as low as you can manage it. Right. Maybe turn it back on when you're looking at your images, but turn it back down.
You know how you can change the display on the Sony? You can go in and check the box in the menu that one of mine is off.
Mhm.
So I just click through them. You can see that if you want to see the histogram or the light mirroring, but one of those I just click and it's off, and it's great for events or at night when I want to save the battery. I just click through until it gets to the off.
Yeah.
No LCD.
I love this new Sony 7 IV because I can just flip the screen around too. I can use this when I want to see it. And then I'll just turn it back around like this, turns the monitor off quickly and saves the power. So that's one of the things I love about the new Sony.
Have you ever done Wi-Fi your camera to a laptop?
I don't Wi-Fi, not to the laptop, but I will send the image to my phone or to my iPad. I do care.
Release there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. So the point was you might be able to use a Wi-Fi feature on a remote on your camera for your phone, depending on the phone. I do recommend downloading the first image, to a device if you have that capability, and looking at it, where you can actually zoom in on, especially on an iPad. So I always carry my iPad with me out in the dark, and that's where I inspect my first images just to make sure things aren't blurry. Because sometimes you might not be able to get in deep enough on the back of your camera to actually see a blurry star, right? But you can on the iPad. Yep. All right. So how to focus in the dark? The first big question, right? So first of all, you're going to need to put your camera in manual focus. Makes sense, right? So autofocus will not work at night. Straight up. No. Okay. You might want to start, if you've got a lens that lets you set like this one has as a manual focus, it has the infinity mark, right? So you might want to start by going to infinity, but sometimes the infinity is not going to actually, it might go past the actual stars. So you can start with infinity, right? But I would encourage you to take a couple of test exposures, look at the images and see if things are in focus the way you want them, and then maybe make a couple of tiny adjustments till you get the stars. That's one way, is to start at infinity, take a couple of exposures till you find where it is, and then stop, and then leave it once you get the stars in focus. And that's probably the simplest way for a camera that has, a feature like this, right? If you're
don't have the manual focus on here, are you screwed?
well, how does it focus?
On minute.
There's no, you,
I have my other camera, but I just thought maybe it's fun to use this.
I'm not sure.
Just, can you focus lock that, like during the day? On something a long ways away and then leave it?
let's,
That I don't know.
let's look at your camera when we're done here,
Yeah.
Sydney. We'll try and figure that out, right?
Yeah.
You know, even these cameras that don't have a set ring, you can put it on manual focus and then make the ring, make the adjustment, right? And so the other thing that you can do is you can, if you can't get the focus at infinity mark, you just set your f-stop all the way open, turn on auto ISO so that it's going to give you a super bright image, right? And then do a digital zooming into a star, one of the brightest stars or a planet. If you happen to see a planet, it may not be in the region that you actually want to take the Milky Way, but try and find a star somewhere else. And then in the live screen on the back, zoom in and then, try to get the star in focus as best you can. Right. So that's sort of the fallback plan for these type of lenses where you don't have a set focal point, but you can put it in manual focus and move the ring. Yeah.
So, my camera goes up over 15,000.
Yeah.
So I think I lose a lot of image clarity.
Well, yeah,
So-
maybe you might want to find this focal point. I mean, an ISO point that
It's a
works for you.
Sony, so, what would you guess? 3,000, maybe max ISO?
3. Yeah. I mean, this one looks great at 12,500. So, it's the new technology is pretty incredible there, but yes, 3,000. But look, I'm regularly taking images at ISO 6,000, and that's what I'm using for great data. So, you're going to be using higher ISO. We're going to learn in just a minute. Yeah.
Just a trick that's helped me, I'm on Sony, which doesn't have the marker on the lens, is when you're focusing, ratchet it up to 102,000 ISO, which is what my body has.
Yeah.
To let you see the actual sharpness of the stars.
Yeah.
Then remember
To turn it back.
to turn it to ISO back down
Yeah.
when you're actually taking the shot, but to get the focus.
Did you guys online here?
Ratchet up temporarily.
Did you hear Rachel suggest that she goes to 105,000 ISO on hers to, the highest ISO that it'll go to? Again, you're trying to, it'll be noisy as heck,
Yeah.
but you're trying to expose those dim stars so you can actually zoom in on one and do the focus. And then after that, I always carry gaffer's tape, right? So put a little piece of gaffer's tape on your focal ring at that point so you don't accidentally hit it while you're doing adjustments with your ring at night, right? Lastly, if that doesn't work, you can set your focus to infinity while it's still light out, put the thing on there and don't touch it, right? And so
Well, infinity means the highest,
the extreme end of the,
most zoom part of it.
yeah, and you can see, it's got the little infinity mark here, right? At that little
yeah.
sideways 8. Yeah.
But it's usually not that anyway.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, that's past on all my Sony lenses, that's past infinity.
It's past infinity, yeah.
It is.
So, I mean, do you have that problem with yours?
Yep.
I mean, I have G Master lenses.
Yeah.
and
I
It's
do
like,
too.
it's a fraction of a millionth of a degree that you turn that.
Yeah.
into focus.
I have a really
Right.
hard time.
It's
Suggestions.
and I used to shoot with a lot of vintage lenses as well. A lot of vintage lenses, depending on the adapter, infinity you might not even be able to get to, extreme focus
Do you ever
because
use a focusing aid?
yeah. So
There's
focusing aid is the other
on the
choice.
front And it will.
Yeah, so there are
Pattern up
some focusing aids as well that you can buy, which is a filter that you put on front of your lens and it gives you crosshairs. That's another great tool as well. I didn't want to talk about it here, but that's an alternative as well that I was using before I bought this new lens, which does it all for me. So with that in mind, the second thing then is composing in the dark. So now you've got the stars in focus. Now you want to get your foreground set and you want to get your horizon level, which is hard to do at night. So the secret there, again, using auto ISO or putting the ISO, keeping the ISO still at 11.2 while you're there. And then take a short exposure, 3 to 5 seconds. You're not trying to make an image you're going to keep, but you just want to be able to take an image so that you can then look at it, or maybe you can see it in live view enough to get your horizon leveled, to get your image in scene, right? So that's the next part before we're actually ready to capture an image, right? Okay, so a lot of test shots there. I do take a lot of test shots to come back with way more images than I'll ever keep, but don't bother deleting them while you're in the field unless your card's getting full, right? Okay, so now this is where you can refer to the cheat sheet. I talked about how to focus, camera settings. Now we're going to talk about getting the image. And here's the exposure rules that you need to follow in dark. So the first thing is for f-stop, you want to set it to the widest possible for your lens. So whatever your lens is, right, you're setting it, you're in fixed, you're not doing any auto exposure. You want to open it up as wide as possible because you want to get as much light coming in. The next thing is you want to set your shutter. So you set your shutter by, you can use what's known as the 500 rule. Okay, and basically what we're trying to do is figure out what's the maximum time that we can leave the shutter open without getting smeary stars, right? And the 500 rule will work for you. So for example, if you have a 50 millimeter lens, 500 divided by 50 is what? 10. That tells you that your exposure is 10 seconds. If it was a 25 millimeter lens or a 24 millimeter lens, what's 500 divided by 25? 20. So you got 20 seconds to use. Okay, now that's for a full frame lens. Okay, if you have a compact crop sensor lens, you need to put your crop factor in, right? So for my Sony a6000 here, it's 1.6. So if I have a 16 millimeter lens, which is this one, 16 times 1.6 is 24. This is a 24 millimeter equivalent. So then I would take the 16 times 1.6, 24 divided by 20 seconds on this 16 millimeter crop sensor lens on my Sony a6000. Okay, that's how that math works. Yours might be 2 on yours. If it's a crop factor of 2, a 24 millimeter lens or is a 50 millimeter equivalent, for example. Yeah, something like that. Okay, now I will tell you that PhotoPills has a feature that will actually tell you the exact number of seconds you can open. You select your camera, you select your lens, you select your f-stop, and it tells you the maximum exposure you want to have. And so I'll tell you this 500 rule works great for stuff you're going to want to put on social media, right? It looks okay, but if you're going to print it, you want to use some of the more other safety factors that PhotoPills will calculate for you. And so, for example, I might actually take that 10 seconds down to like 6 seconds to ensure that I have the sharpest stars if I'm going to make a big high quality print out of that. So there still will be a tiny little bit of smear with 500 rule in some cases, but it won't be noticeable until you blow your image up to a big 16 or 24 inch print.
So you would choose a slightly shorter exposure over, which would mean maybe a higher
Right.
higher ISO.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the 500 rule would be the maximum time you'd want to have your shutter. Anything less than that will always give you a better quality from the stars. Okay. So that's the safety limit.
What about making a huge print?
Well, then,
Wall size?
so then you might want to, they say sort of the 300 would be sort of, there's this 300 rule for the super fine. If you want to just do the math on a calculator, PhotoPills will calculate that for you. So the last thing then is that that gives you the only variable you have to get a lot of data is to change your ISO. And that's okay. I know we all think we got to get 100 ISO to get great quality prints. You got to let go of that for getting great pictures of the night sky and at dark. So, and it's okay. So I actually start all of my exposures at 1600 ISO, and then I will increase the ISO until I get a good histogram for the image that I'm looking at, depending on if it's a super dark or if I've got, I don't know, some skylights or some city lights or some buildings with some lights that will, add more light to the foreground. And we're going to talk about that next. So ISO is the only variable you have if you follow this rule of opening up your f-stop and setting your shutter based on the 500 rule. And by the way, once you figure it out for a given lens, you don't have to change it. So like I said, I know this is 8 seconds at f1.8 on this lens, and I don't ever have to worry about changing my time on this, right? For a given lens, if it's going to become your go-to astro lens, right? you know, you don't have to have.
A related question.
Yeah.
You have an A7.
That might have changed.
Get the lower.
Well, I hope so in your business.
I did just
I'm
because
sorry.
I don't want to work with those bigger files, and I can always take a panel with a
Yep,
50
so that-
millimeter lens and get, you know, stitch that back together in.
But it wasn't technically because you thought the larger sensors were noisy or anything.
No.
Okay.
Yeah. So just know you can
Is
always,
it-
it was a question online.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Is it possible to mute everyone who is, it's a little hard to hear because I think there's somebody who's unmuted.
Oh, yeah, some of the other speakers in the background here. Give me just a second here. Oh, and you know what, you guys have been chatting and I haven't been following the chat, so please mute yourself. Let me see. Yeah. Yeah, that's because I'm logged in as Rachel for the. It's weird. I can't see them. I can't see my mouse on the screen.
I appreciate you. Welcome.
I'm gonna do this, bring the participants over to my other screen, bring the meetings back over here. There we go. And now go back to this. All right, now I got to pay attention because we're running out of time here. All right, so I'm just going to go through this part briefly. And I'm going to give you guys a PDF of all this stuff as well. So you'll have that. So here's an unprocessed image. So what I'm trying to do is get an image that ideally looks like this in camera, because you can still see I got a decent Milky Way. This was shot with this Rokinon 10 lens here, exposure of f2.8, 34 seconds at ISO 3200. Right now, with that big lens, this f10 lens, I can actually take a 30-second exposure and still keep sharp stars, right? But what I'm trying to show you here is the histogram. This is what a good histogram is going to look like of the night sky, is to have this hump on the left and a valley and a second bump, right? That's what that looks like. We're going to look at a couple of these. This is another unprocessed image with my A6000 with a 16 millimeter lens, 1600 at 6 seconds, but f1.4, right? Still sort of looks like good. And so this one, I got it, you know, all the pixels are located right here. Right. And so here's what you can take from that unprocessed image before with a histogram that looks like this. You want to try and get an image that looks like, you know, with a histogram better distributed over here on this processed image. And this is just talking about where the light is, you know, across the scene. Right. So I definitely always try to look at the histogram of the image that I'm shooting my test shots before I start capturing, you know, good images in the field.
What I'm hearing is a good histogram. Looks like they're all blended together close.
This is the processed image. Let's talk about what you're actually trying to get, you know, in the scene. So, you know, this was the before, it was muted. And of course, here I did some work to try and actually I should process this one in Photoshop, right? But here's what we're trying to do. So this peak one is the dark sky. So that's all your dark sky pixels are
On the left.
collected on the left. Then the second peak here is probably your foreground, and any light pollution is going to get collected in that second peak. So if you don't have a lot of light pollution, you might actually get an image where there's just one peak, right? Or it's an image that you're not exposing your foreground, you might only have a single peak, right? And you want to try and get it closer to the center line, but you're never going to get it past the center line. It'll be totally washed out, right? And then the lowlands out here, I say, those are your stars. So your stars are all collected over here in the right. Okay, so that's a good histogram. If you can get an histogram that looks something like that in the field, you're going to have a good image to process. Yeah,
Does that have any photograph or just?
for the night sky, for night skies. Yeah.
So it's
Mike?
different.
Yeah.
How will you know that you're not blocking it from stars? Or does it matter?
You know, I think you really just have to look at the image that you've got,
As long as they.
because there's such a small percentage of the actual scene, right? If you take just the Milky Way sky with no foreground, just the overhead, right, you're going to get, you know, everything's going to be way to the left because it's going to be mostly dark pixels in the scene, right? So that's what a good histogram looks like. So just a couple of bad examples. Again, as you're looking at this, even though the histogram looks good, I took it for too long, 120 seconds, and look what happened to my pixels. That's what a blurred pixels look like. This image happens to be one I was exposing for the foreground, right? But I chose to show you what, a bad image would look like. Yep.
So can you see that in the naked eye? You have to go up on a view.
You have to zoom in at the image. Yeah.
In that case, you took two and. merged them
This was
together.
going to be the foreground part of a 2-image series. This image was not two. This is the raw image. I just wanted to show you what a bad one looks like. This one is a bad image. The ISO was too low. So here at ISO 500, the low ISOs, right? You just get an image where everything is, to the left. There's not enough data in this to actually pull the Milky Way out, right? You should be seeing in camera a little bit of the Milky Way and just keep bumping the ISO. And now here's the best thing to do when you're in the field. Take a bunch of repetitive scenes to figure out your camera and your setup, right? Do an ISO, bump the ISO, bump the ISO, bump the ISO, come home with, 10 images where you bump the ISO sequentially and see what they look like, and then figure out what works good for your camera. That's how I did this. And then remember those settings. Save, if you got a memory setting on your camera, set that into your thing so your camera's ready to go with the right ISO, the right exposure, all those sort of things. That's how you can get going quickly in the field. So the first couple nights that you're out, just try to gather a bunch of examples to bring back and see what's going to give you the best, scene. Because once you figure it out, as I said, you can repeat those settings the next time you go out. Okay. All right. You guys want to get to seeing some processing. So let's get to some processing here. So I'm going to skip to processing. So here's the goals of processing that we're going to do. And I'm going to get to some examples in the last 10 minutes here. You want to try and number one, bring out the foreground, right? So you want to try and bring out your foreground if you've got a foreground in your scene, if you're doing a single image, right? And we're not talking about composites here, but in a single image, you want to bring the foreground out. You want to try and bring out the highlights of the Milky Way, right? So the cloudy part of the Milky Way, you want to try and bring that up. These things that are dark, we call them the dust lanes. You want to try and darken the dust lanes. So those are the three main priorities in processing your image. You also want to try and control the contrast in the core to try and give as much detail there, because there's so many interesting things that are happening in the core. There's a couple of nebula that are in there as well, and they're always there. That's the thing. Once you look at the Milky Way, it's like looking at your best friend. You begin to know what their features are, and you know what they look good at and how to best light them, right? So you'll learn that. White balance is a part of this. That's a personal choice. If your lens, when a lot of lenses, when they're wide open, they'll get a little bit of purple fringing on the stars. And that's where a better quality lens will help control that actually with the optics. But if it doesn't, you want to try and take the purple fringing off of the stars. That's a feature of Lightroom. And then controlling the noise is probably the last thing that you want to also try and play with. Lightroom now has some great noise features. I used denoise by Topaz to process my images for the best quality. So with that, let's just jump in and look at some quick editing features here. So we're going to go over to Lightroom here.
You could do the whole afternoon.
I can do, oh yeah.
Great. I mean, just so much information.
Yeah, well, I'm going to show you some quick edit, some of the new tools, and then I'll give you some of the things that I do to every image.
So Topaz is
It's an artificial, it's a third-party tool. It's uses artificial intelligence to.
I'm looking for it on Google.
Wait for the Black Friday special.
Topaz Lab.
Yeah. Okay, so let me create you guys online can see my Lightroom, right?
Yes.
Okay, so here's let me do this so that the tools come into play here. Oh, what the heck? Okay, there we go. Let me reset this one. Okay, let me put this away. Where's the?
And Mike, you guys can stay. The next workshop isn't until 1:15 in another hour. So this is a lunch break we're going into now.
Yeah.
So if you want to stay and go on.
Oh, we got 5 minutes till lunch break starts. So I might go a few minutes over, but okay. So here's an image that I took. let's go to library. So first of all, this was taken with my Sony A7 IV with my new Samyang lens, right? So this is my best quality images now. This was ISO of 3200 at 24 millimeters f 1.8 for 8 seconds. Okay, so again, I've got those figured out. That's just my default setting in my camera. Okay, so now when we go to develop this, right? We're in develop mode. And so now you can see here my histogram. It's pretty dark, so I don't have much of a second valley because the foreground's
How many seconds did you say?
8 seconds, 8 seconds, 8,
Oh, okay.
8, not 80, 8 seconds.
Okay, no.
Yeah. And if we zoom in, you can see there's just maybe a little bit of smear on these stars, but that's acceptable. Yeah. And this lens is great. There's a little bit of blue fringing, but there's no purple fringing on that lens, and you can sort of see a little bit of hint of the Milky Way in there, right? So, the first thing that I want to do here is set my color temperature. Now, one trick for setting color temperature is to raise the vibrance and the saturation all the way to 100, and then come in and sort of play with it until you get the best looking, color balance that you like in here, and then reset these back to 0. And that's one trick. That's a quick and dirty one to try and get a good color balance. I just, for my own style, I typically set it by default to 4300 because that's where I like most of my images to be, and that's just my personal preference. So
as much real as possible.
yeah, I like to go for the realistic look, right? Okay. And so that's the first thing that I do. Now, this next thing that I'm going to do on the whole image with Photoshop is try to bump up the exposure a bit. And now I'm just looking at that foreground. I'm going to come back to the sky a little bit later, but you can already see I'm spreading it out. The Milky Way starting to come in, right? And I'm starting to get my foreground in where I want it. So I'm really just trying to get the foreground where I want it here. Maybe raise the shadows a bit, right? Okay, so I've got that. Now, one thing that I have not done on this scene yet is I haven't put the color profile corrections. And this is where it's amazing what this will do before I've done anything else. Is I come into Samuel. I'm not sure why it's not selecting, but look how that immediately took care of the vignetting, right? And did a great job. Again, if we turn this off, that was before, that's after sort of the lens correction. So they're doing amazing things with the lens corrections right now for the modern lenses, right? So, now I might say, do I have a decent scene here in the front? Okay, so now we're going to come over here to, I chose this scene because it's got a simple horizon line because I didn't want it to get too crazy. So I'm coming to a mask, and I'm doing the select sky for the mask, right? And the great thing about the new Lightroom is it does a great job of selecting sky, even when the sky is complex, right? And now we can come in here and we can change the exposure for the sky where we're just impacting what's going on in the sky, right? So now I'm bringing the exposure back down here. I'm changing the contrast a bit on this, and I'm trying to get, a good look to my Milky Way here. Even this, I haven't even done any crazy masking. Already it's starting to look pretty decent, right? This might be enough. You say, oh, that looks great. And now I can put that away. I could put that away.
How did you get the layer for the top sky around here?
Okay.
Select sky.
So this is the masking feature right here. And under masking, actually, you can say plus, you can say select sky. It actually selects the sky, right? And if I want to create for the foreground, I can say select sky, and then I can it can invert it, and now it just grabs the bottom. So I could have done this separately too. I could have just started with a mask for the bottom and a mask for the top. Depends on how you prefer to do that, right? So they've made it so easy now for doing this. So now here's another cool feature that I wanted to show you about. Before we get too crazy, I'm just sort of trying to do this increment. Let's come back down here to noise reduction. Let's try to do a little bit of star sharpening. So I'm going to say shift, Alt. So I'm trying to bring my masking up to sharpen the stars a bit. So here you can see with the shift key and hitting the masking, I'm highlighting just the stars. And now I can try to sharpen them up a little bit, right? So you can see that that has helped with the stars a bit. And then for noise reduction, I can bring this in, and I might want to be looking at might want to be looking, maybe see what it's looking at down here. I'm sorry that this keeps jumping out of scene here. So let's pick a spot here to look at what's it going to look like down here in the water, and try to improve the noise. So look how we can, improve some of the noise here. But you always, if you try to optimize for that, you also want to go see what it's doing up here on the Milky Way, right? So I want to see that it's not making that too awful as well. So maybe I'm happy with that. That's quite a bit of noise. I usually try to keep the noise here to below 50. Because I don't like too bad, right? And so now a few more things. Let's go back to our mask. Let's click on this mask. Clarity is also works a little bit, but not too much. You don't want to drive it too up, but you can sort of see it's starting to increase the detail in there with a little bit of clarity. 34, maybe quite a bit, right? And trying to adjust the blacks globally to get the sky down, right? Now it's interesting. A lot of folks talk about when you've got green like this, if you've got the adjustment set, if it's on some nights, this is actually called air glow. The sky will actually be green. This is the true color of the night sky. There's that air glow, which is ions up in the sky being lit. And so that's actually pretty natural look to it, right? You can see. And so the last couple of things that we could probably do to this, I would be happy with that now. That actually looks pretty good, right? But if you want to go a little further, here's one other thing we can do now is we can come up here and let's create another mask. And I'm going to start with a brush, and I'm just going to brush this. Okay, let me turn. Okay? I've got my flow set to low here, so it's sort of working its way. I'm trying to highlight the bright parts here of the Milky Way, right? And so now what I want to do with that is I'm just trying to make the light over here pop a little bit more, right? So I'm trying to bring up the highlights and maybe a little bit of the exposure on that. You don't want to go too far. That looks too fake, but just enough so that the clouds are bright, right? And now I might add a second mask with a brush, and I could, highlight where the dust lanes are, right? And so now I might take the exposure down on those, but you don't want to go too deep, right? The dust lanes is hard because there's also some bright parts of that, right? That are in the dust lanes. So another cool trick now that exists with this new Lightroom is I can take this and let me push this out here. I can say, let's intersect this mask with a color range. Okay, this is a cool new feature. We say color range. And so now I've got this little picker here, right? Let me turn off this light. I can come down here and pick a dark point, right? And so now what it's done is I pick this dark color, and the brush that I had before, it's taking everything that has that dark color that's in the area of the brush, and that's the only part of the scene that it's going to impact. So the light areas are ignored now. Anything that's not that color pixel.
Yeah.
The luminance range is a little bit funky. Luminance works also. And
Begins to narrow it down too much, it gets harder.
yeah, so I'm still trying to, I played for the last week trying to, because I wanted to show you luminance, and luminance does work, but it's still a bit edgy in Lightroom. I use luminance masks in Photoshop all the time, and they're way more accurate and way easier to control in Photoshop than they've done giving you here in Lightroom yet. But so this will work, and let me just show, I'm trying to show you how quickly this works now. We come in here, and now if we set this, you can see it's just impacting the darker parts, right? And it's leaving the highlights alone. And you can even come back on the brush here and add more brushed areas back here behind it, right? Because it keeps intersecting, but it's not impacting that. And it also can work on the light pollution that's on the horizon as well. Although, here's what I'm going to say about light pollution. I can add another mask here with a brush, right? I can brush the light pollution, right? And then I can do the same thing. I can intersect that with another color range mask. I can select the color of the light pollution, and then I can come down here and I can desaturate that to try and reduce the impact of the light pollution. So that's one of the things that I do with light. Yeah, you try to select that brownish color because light pollution is typically going to come in as brown. Select that brown color with the intersected mask and just desaturate it. Try to take the highlights out of that to sort of minimize its impact. And so there we have it. That's our, you know, our you could be a final solution there. You can see how we were able to sort of do some work there. Okay. So there you go, you guys. I hope that's a good start for getting, and you can get pretty far, especially if you just want to share this on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. That's a pretty good image. And we'll
So if you ever go further in Photoshop, it's stack.
absolutely, yes. So I do a lot of stacking, which will give you, the good thing about stacking is not only does it get rid of noise, but it brings up highlights and it darkens the colors, and you really get some amazing images. And if I was just to share, let me go over here to my catalog. So we're done, you guys. But let me go over here to my catalog, to all my photographs, to all 107,000 photos. Let me go to,
barely any for you.
let me go up here. Let me go text. I'm trying to get to Milky Way. And I'm trying to get to my 5-star Milky Way photos. Okay, so this image right here, you can see this is 8,000 by 9,000 images. This is a panel that I took with a 50mm lens. This is a 3x3, right? And it's stacked, so you can see what you can do with that. You can start to see the nebula in it, that type of thing. So by stacking, you know,
And when you're talking stacking, are you stitching it?
I mean, this is a stitched image. So for one way to get details, to stitch it. And then here's another example. Where's the stacked image? This is a stacked one right here. You can begin to see the type of color you can get out of that as well. So this,
The same picture 20 times.
so for this image, which I actually submitted to one of the Camera Club ones. So the sky here is 12 images stacked, and the foreground is one image but edited. So this is a composite stacked image, right? Yeah. So yeah. All right, guys. Thanks. Good luck. We'll see you guys back here at. We're going to shut down the room so we can save the meeting. But let me just make sure I got this right here. We will be back at 1:15. Okay. Have lunch. We'll see you back at 1:15, everyone.
So 115 is
One
getting
question, Mike.
Yeah.
Or electronics. So I have the broken on, it's the 24th.